Music and songwriting in relation to the semiological tripartition. Part 1. Abstract. This thesis is an exploration of a post-structuralist philosophy known as musical semiotics. The intent of this research is not to encapsulate the ephemeral state of musical truth, but rather to consider a non-traditional way of approaching musical matters. Furthermore, musical semiology is a perceptive stratagem, which will be employed in consideration of both the research and creative portions of this thesis. Musical purpose and artistic expression is a focal point of the thesis. The first section contains the research portion on musical semiotics, which focuses on the semiological tripartition. It is then followed by a semiological analysis of the song Graceland by Paul Simon. Finally, practical applications of the research and analysis will be explored. This is in consideration of the creative section of this thesis, which emphasizes the songwriting process and its relation to musical semiotics. Part 2. Musical semiotics. Musical semiotics is a convergence of multiple parts: the actual theory, its historical and philosophical context, and its applications. John Molino, a forefather of the subject, explores these extensively in his 1990 Musical Fact and the Semiology of Music. This quintessential work acts as a placeholder for its followers, such as Jean-Jacques Nattiez, and will serve as a guideline for this portion. Molino's intention is to qualify music as a symbolic form, the symbol being a vehicle to understand and describe the meaning and nature of music or a musical fact. However, the meaning of the symbol itself is a vital consideration. The importance lies in the function of language. To use a symbol, there may be a simple connection between the signified and the vocabulary to account for it, such as reference, substitute, representation, etc. In this case, the word chord refers to the combination of multiple pitches played simultaneously, but the sound of a chord does not refer to the word chord. Alternatively, the symbol may simultaneously reference itself and also the sign, acting as a relational character. Now, the word chord refers to the sound of a chord, and the sound of a chord refers to the word chord. It is from this frame of reference that Molino considers music to be symbolic. The acoustic phenomena produced by music may resemble and evoke the noises of the world. They may be images of our feelings. Similarly, if an orchestra performs a Mozart concerto for an audience, they are creating an acoustic phenomenon that will be interpreted by the attending individuals. Bowles defines this idea as a sound complex, in which the physical qualities of sound produces a given type of emotional reverberation. However, the source of this emotion is ambiguous. David Carr writes that the emotional properties we are inclined to take this or that piece of music to express are nevertheless properties of the music rather than of our own mental states. This alludes to the idea of compositional intent, which finds that emotional meaning is inherent to the creation process. Yet, Molino finds it apt to consider the role of the composer in regards to the acoustic phenomenon and the interpretation, without assigning value, thus separating musical semiotics into three portions, known as the semiological tripartition. He considers music to simultaneously be the production of an acoustic object, that acoustic object itself, and finally, the reception of the object. In simpler terms, there is a sender, a message, and a receiver. Although each part will constantly change and evolve, the symbolic form does not. Molino titled these three cornerstones the neutral, aesthetic, and poietic. The first consideration is the neutral, or the product, referring to the physical representation of music. The aesthetic dimension comes from the listener and their interpretation of said music. However, the sounds must be created, for it is not simply a transmission and a reception. This creative process is the poietic. Although the tripartite are separated as such, each are influenced by the other. View this diagram. As this diagram shows, each element of the semiological tripartition influences the other. For example, the poietic domain affects the neutral's acoustic and taxonomic description, as well as the athesic response. Similarly, the athesic information of the composer also affects their poietic. In other words, their own emotive response is a motivator in the compositional process, acting as a representational feedback loop. Yet, once the process is complete, the performer and the listener are necessary intermediaries. Roland Persson researched this phenomena through a 3-year-long practical study of a tertiary musical department. He finds that the performers rely on their emotional life, which serves a multitude of functions in the life of a musician in practicing as well as when performing. Thus, the poietic is affected by athesic qualities, and its created neutral is then influenced by the athesic information of the performer. This symbolic interpretation of music is a byproduct and evolution of past musical understandings. Molino is careful in considering the ambiguity of musical definitions. Is it the art of arranging sounds over a period of time? Or is it a physical science and a study of acoustics? Or possibly an aesthetic production of sound that is pleasing to the ear? There's also the geometric considerations of Pythagoras, who quantify tonal relationships through the use of ratios. Bennett considers music to be an imitation of the stresses of human experience manifested in sound and achieving beauty. This sentiment may tie into the religious and ceremonial usages of music, which dwell on the emotive and beautiful aspects of composition. However, Molino is quick to encapsulate all into a single consideration of music. The symbolic allows for all to thrive in the same space, for each takes part in the tripartition. Furthermore, there's not one music, but many musics. The point being that a singular definition does not surmise the musical fact. Even further, both Nattiez and Molino consider semiological evaluation as an infinite process. This process is in consideration of the functional potential of the tripartite. Each abstract unit, neutral, aesthetic, and poietic, is conclusive until the presuppositions are replaced by new hypotheses or new difficulties. The conception of age and growing up applies directly to this sentiment, for a song's athesic and neutral evolves with time and musical exposure. Emotions transfer between relevant and irrelevant, and the ear captures what it captures. Schwartz clarifies this with a comparison between the casual listener and the musician. Although the first considers music to be a language of emotions, and the second a language of tones, there is a common intersection in the act of listening. Yet, the musician was once the casual listener, implying the reality of growth in relation to music. In reference to Nattiez, this is a phenomenon that is inherent to music. He believes that musical value cannot be defined to the quantitative, qualitative, and analytical interplay. Since this value is undeterminable and cannot be defined, the symbolic process, in Nattiez's view, is a challenge to traditional music analysis. Furthermore, the never-ending semiological process finds prime importance in the perception of the individual. First, the understanding of the neutral is reliant on the capabilities of the ear to actively listen. Repeatedly listen to a song will reveal further neutral qualities. The same applies to the athesic. In the following section, a practical approach to semiological analysis is taken with the song Graceland by Paul Simon. Part 3. Practical Applications. A facet of songwriting and composition is the art of the craft. There is, at least personally, a goal of advancement and proficiency. The potentiality relies on consistent work and evaluation. At times, there is not much consideration of their historical placement or their cultural meaning. It is simply creation and practice. However, the tripartition opens up a new perspective on the matter. An important concept is the never-ending process of evaluating music through semiosis, which challenges a face value understanding. Further, the understanding of a song becomes more complicated when it is a personal work. There are self-reservations and self-doubt. There is a normalcy and a realization of the tiny moving parts that comprise the work. Similarly, the advancement of skill level and technical understandings may, or may not, provide an useful insight. Therefore, the many factors that contribute and counter the creative process must be dealt with through self-awareness. The study of the tripartition automatically reveals inconsistencies of the self. The three elements, neutral, aesthetic, and poetic, are constantly in motion as music is created, captured, and listened to. An observable instance is with the aesthetic influence on the poetic. A chord progression in the minor key may connect with the composer's melancholy state. Taken a step further, the neutral itself may influence the poetic and aesthetic. Especially in consideration of modern recording techniques, the neutral is in constant evolution if the poetic is performed using recording software. In other words, the object is constantly observed and then transformed. The neutral and aesthetic of Graceland will now be explored extensively, and a brief conjecture of the poetic will be formulated by using interviews with the writer. The overall scope, however, will be indicative of current musical understanding. It will explore the reality of the ear and the practicalities of active listening. It will act as a perceptive strategy and challenge my previous understandings of effective songwriting. Part A, Graceland by Paul Simon. The neutral. In this case study, the neutral consists of the mix, arrangement, timbral qualities, and harmonic content. Lyrics are also a part of the neutral, yet the interpretation finds itself in the aesthetic realm. Further, in order to fully analyze the object, the listening process intentionally shifted through repeated listening. First, the entire mix is considered, then the individual instruments, and then the relation to other instruments and the entirety of the song. There is volume and dynamic range, pan-in, depth, frequency, content, and effects to analyze. Singular instruments and their important relationships were the first focus. The kick. It sounds punchy, bouncy, and tubby, meaning that the beater and the low end are present full and balanced. There's a long sustain, almost unnatural, meaning that compression with long release time may have been employed. I was curious about the dynamic range, and it appeared to fluctuate beat to beat. The 2 and 4 of each measure had the louder accent. An important interaction is with the bass guitar. It sounds below the bass, meaning that each have their own frequency space in the low end, but they do not mask the other. Snare drives the song, is round but still has energy in the high end. Each hit leaves quickly, meaning that it may have a quick release if compressed. At times, it sounds like a flange effect is layered, possibly to add movement to the drum. In terms of dynamic range, a majority of the measures start louder and slowly lower in volume, then the cycle starts over. There also is a sound that could be a gated snare reverb that has been reversed. Hi-hat. Not used frequently, but serves an important purpose. Every 2 bars, it comes in on the 2 end of the first bar. Adds subtle rhythmic change. Shaker. Kielbasa. Present in the high frequency range and appears to alternate shaker and kielbasa. Each serve the same purpose, however, which is to subdivide the B. Auxiliary percussion. There appears to be 3 different instruments, a tambourine, claves, and possibly sleigh bells or hand claps. All 3 perform the same function and the same rhythms, but all 3 together provide depth to the overall mix. Bongos occasionally appear. Bass, well placed, yet still in the back of the mix. The tone is odd, and it's difficult to place the playing style. There may be a chorus effect on it. It is interesting to hear the melodic lines and riffs that it plays. At times, it almost acts as a lead instrument in this regard. Electro guitars. It sounds like 3 different guitars with 3 different tones and functions are placed throughout the track. One is played with a slide and has a long reverb tail. The other has a quick, possibly 16th note delay that decays quickly. There's a third guitar that plays rhythm and plods along 16th notes in the verses. Background vocals. There are possibly 3 harmony vocals and provide nice harmonic contours in the background. At times they are suspended and cause tension in the mix. When layered onto the lead vocals, it creates an important reaction in the listener. Paul's voice becomes heightened in specific instances because of this. Lead vocals. The effects are interesting and possibly a hollow reverb intertwined with a short delay. Paul's consonants are gentle and clear. As stated previously, the overall mix is in consideration of the interrelationships. For example, the placement of the kick and the bass guitar. Neither obscures the other and are mixed on top of each other in terms of frequency content. At least in terms of the low end, the kick may have more harmonic energy between 60 Hz and 200 Hz, and the bass may have more energy from 200 Hz to 400 Hz. However, the ranges are still articulate throughout the mix. The beater of the kick, which is more present in the high end, is clear, although vocals and guitars may reside in the same space. Additionally, the bass serves an important function in the song and is a consistent drive-in force. It takes up a good chunk of the low-mid frequencies, but does not obscure the snare vocals or guitars. It surely sounds compressed, seeing as a lot of harmonic energy is packed into a small space. There is some edge to the tone, possibly from distortion or high-gain staging. The playing style, which sounds like picking, gives the notes a noticeable attack. Additionally, a modulation effect is noticeable and may be from a chorus pedal. Seeing as the lead vocals are one of the most important elements of the song, it is worthwhile to consider its placement in the mix. Simon's vocal range lies in the high-mid frequencies, which could potentially compete with the snare. Yet, although his vocals are much louder in comparison, the snare hits are still audible. Possibly, it may have to do with the depth of the mix. The vocals are triggering a lot of reverb, while the snare maintains a room sound. So, although the vocals are louder, they appear farther back, allowing both snare and vocals to maintain clarity. The guitars also have the potential to compete with the vocals. Much of the clarity seems to derive from the placement within the song. They pop out when the vocals take a break and step back when the vocals come back in. It is a give and take relationship. However, the guitar is usually of a higher frequency when it is juxtaposed with the vocals. In this way, both maintain their space within the mix. The guitar effects also have much to do with the clarity. The delays and spring reverbs automatically create timbral and spatial differentiations. These relationships evolve with time. Considering these changes in relation to the entirety of the mix will hint at arrangement decisions. Graceland is driven by the consistency of the kick, snare, and bass. There is rarely a moment when any of these instruments are resting. So, the intrigue of the song comes from the variation in the rest of the instrumentation. The percussion, guitars, and vocals enter and leave to provide space for the other. Even the different guitar parts perform this function at a micro scale. The interweaving of these elements allow the ear to constantly latch on to new things, whilst feeling comfortable with the drive-in rhythm section. More importantly is the effect that each entrance and departure causes in the song. The slide guitar introduces a short melody, the slapback guitar has rhythmic and depth of field change, the background vocals act as a space filler, gluing together the sonic palette with sustained chords. The percussion hits introduce large changes in the stereo field. The rest of the instrumentation appears to step back in these moments and then quickly come back to the forefront. The lead vocals are the unifier of the song. Lyrical and narrative ideas give humanistic purpose to the song. Bowles poignantly states that vocal expression resembles the musical expression, and both fitly parallel the bodily attitude. Moreover, the vocal lines come in once the instrumentation needs a reset or a change in phrase. The melody and rhythmic executions add dimensionality to the song because it is the first introduction of a long-form melodic idea. It also adds harmonic variation to the presented chordal pattern. It is in E major and repeats the same few chords throughout the tune: E, A, C sharp minor, B. The simplistic progression is juxtaposed by the nuanced vocal performance. Athesic. Objectivity and subjectivity separate the neutral and athesic. The previous account takes a formalist approach to musical analysis and seeks to avoid misrepresentations. The athesic, however, relies on the subjective and personal interpretation. In the case of Graceland, the lyrical content and execution generate the greatest emotive response in me. As stated previously, the humanistic qualities of the vocal performance immediately cause emotive reactions in a listener. Similarly, if the melodies and intentions align with the listener's tastes and preferences, then the connection will be stronger. This derives from upbringing, mental recognition, and nostalgia. For example, I was raised with classic rock and 70s folk rock with the likes of Chicago, Van Morrison, and James Taylor. Conversely, I was also raised with gospel hymns and religious music. Graceland harbors elements from both realms. It consists of a rock instrumentation and feel, as well as a soulful vocal performance and a background choir. In this specific track, I hear a narrative and an emotional placement. An important lyrical aspect of this track is the lack of fulfillment, for he never reaches Graceland. Here is an interpretation of a few key phrases. I messed up that sound that's confident how educational. We are on a road trip, traveling through historically distraught lands and its natural beauty. The excitement for the music city, Graceland, is embodied in the Delta. My tribe carried 9 years old, shot my first man, but recently lived in Graceland. Paul is reminiscent of his divorce, but finds solidity in his destination. As the track continues, we realize that his child may be simply a passing memory. She come back, tell me she gone, I didn't know that, blah blah blah. Repair's sadness and regret fully emerges here. Graceland quickly transfers into a state of mind rather than a physicality. The spite for his wife's departure becomes nostalgia as he remembers the way she brushed her hair from her forehead. The emotive delivery of the specific line reveals Simon's inner feelings. Then, her retort encapsulates a major theme of the song, moving on from lost love. And my traveling companion goes same sack, goes same bun, re-speed, Graceland. Paul is now being upfront about his thought process. He is alone, except for his regret and his hope for the future. There's a girl near she's scared, sharing this man, blah, yeah. The melancholy starts to shift into positivity and empathy at this point. Everyone goes through bad times, and sometimes the future doesn't come without a few scratches. This is another example of the evolving mood and intention of the track. I'm going to Graceland for you to smell Graceland. Again and again, Simon brings up Graceland, a symbol of hope. There is a universality to this motif, which anyone can apply to their own situations. Graceland isn't simply a place, it's a state of mind. And I may have fan every live, every end, he's Graceland. Finally, the lyrics reveal the literal and figurative intentions, yet there are subsidiary feelings that derive from the song. The first is from the groove, which is light and feel-good. It is danceable and catchy, and feels like a galloping horse, riding off into the sunset. This juxtaposition with the heartfelt lyrics create a complex internal effect. It adds depth to the meaning and solidifies the intentions. Poetic. The poetic is only known to the creator, unless they share their specific process. After viewing a few Paul Simon interviews, it's possible to make conjectures about his poetic. However, the actual nature is unknown. To start, he makes a crucial point of emotional validity in a 1986 interview. He references New York streets corner singing and old school rock and roll as a sound that strikes an emotional chord within him. This feeling is then the subject of a search which he hopes to reveal in his writing. Importantly, this does not mean that his chosen musical styling is a direct descendant. Simon believes that the more you develop your interest in life, the more easily you will be able to express whatever your emotions and your mind brings out. He cites the Everly Brothers, the 70s New York and British folk scene, ska, and the blues as a few of his influences. His music, therefore, will intrinsically possess these qualities that he likes and enjoys. Yet, Simon describes his creation process as subconscious. For example, the style and lyrical content and phrasing will come naturally and in the moment. He will then shave it down to create a more cohesive and understandable part. A final important note deals with creativity and innovation. Simon is strongly in favor of experimentation and musical discovery. Music from different cultures and countries all have their own beauty and meaning, and the act of learning and studying the music of these cultures is important. Discovering these new musics will help develop taste and interest, thus allowing for musical growth. This small insight into Paul Simon's poietic is informative of his aesthetic. The influencers on the poietic finds prime importance with him. In consideration of my own poietic, I can relate to the importance of inspiration and intention. A song can develop simply from a feeling or a mood. Yet, Simon has a much deeper understanding of the subject, which hopefully will be revealed in time. B. Personal works. My compositions had a consistent poietic approach. Since guitar is my primary instrument, each song began with a riff or a chordal pattern. The decision as to where to start harmonically changed with each tune. For the first track, Orangey began with a tone that I built using a distortion flange and reverb guitar pedal. I found an interesting sonic relationship between the D sharp of the 5th string and the B on the 6th. This major third resonated in an odd and modulated way, which I slowly developed into a high energy and anthemic riff. I then created sections, transitions, and additional parts. Orangey features multiple guitar overdubs of varying tones, which interconnect in interesting ways. I then wanted to conceptualize a final product. This meant recording the guitars into Logic, tapping out a MIDI drum part, adding a bass guitar, and then a scratch vocal. Understanding the compositional possibilities was a crucial consideration of the track. In this way, I could quickly hear the parts that clashed and needed to be rewritten, as well as room for additional instrumentation. Sections and transitions were also altered using this method. I always listen beginning to end, and envision that it is my first time listening. I attempt to separate myself from my own work, which allows me to overcome insecurities and rash decision making. For example, my proclivity to judge my vocals in a harsh way is a barrier to a positive and creative atmosphere. Taking my ego out of the equation can override these human deficiencies, although it only gets easier with practice and mindfulness. Then, I left the song alone for a chunk of time. This is always an important step in my poietic, for I need to forget what I have been hearing. When I come back to the song, I cannot have any preconceived notions. Otherwise, rewrites and alterations will not be beneficial. In the case of my third track, Stares Back at Us, I finished the basic instrumentation with the idea that the structure and transitions were born. I had no solutions, only that I wanted to change everything and anything to make it work. However, I took some time, came back to it, and thoroughly enjoyed the listen. If I had gone back later that day, or even the next day, my opinion would have been the same. The song would have been fresh in my mind, as well as negative feelings for my own creative work. The semiotic feedback loop is also a writing consideration. To start, the aesthetic motivated my poietic. When I wrote a part that I found emotional, I knew that the song was developing in a good direction. For example, Radical has a guitar part that is feel-good, bouncy, and a little wacky. Subsequently, the final song consists of these qualities. Further, the neutral is also a consideration. Since I am instantly hearing my performance and ideas, I can take this objective understanding of my music and apply it to the poietic, thus a representational feedback loop. Lyrically, these three tracks varied in development. Orangey was regimented. I started from the beginning and worked at a cohesive vocal melody, phrasing, and narrative. It began entirely from the subconscious. I looped the track and sang over it until the part was written. Simultaneously, I considered the song meaning and an effective dynamic contrast. Radical, however, was written with the idea of flow and phrasing. The lyrics are almost nonsensical, seeing as I focused heavily on vocal delivery and placement. Yet the song thrives off of the lyrical absurdity because the overall mood is also the same. I then brought the songs to the recorded studio. Since these tracks are rhythmic and groove focused, I began with the drums. The two drummers that I recorded, Patrick Smith and Colin McDonald, both liked my MIDI drum mock-up and based their playing off of it. They both did a great job of honing in on the emotive intentions of the tracks. However, I was also considering the sonic qualities of prime importance. I wanted clarity and punchiness, as well as a nice room sound on the drums. Using outboard compressors and equalizers, I experimented and captured some effective drum tones. Conceptually, I routed each drum pair into different preamps to alter the harmonic intake. For example, the kick drum had 2 microphones, one inside and one out. Instead of using the same make and model of preamplifier to drive the signal, I used opposing ones. Although the nuance of each hardware unit is subtle, it was an effective experiment. I recorded the bass and electric guitars with a careful ear to the drum performance. The bass, especially, was altered to fit the new kick patterns. Tonally, I also sought to provide timbral contrast to the drum kit in each additional part. The electric guitars were processed using variations of distortion, flange, and reverb. Stares Back at Us, however, utilized a digital delay. Each additional guitar part would be altered in a significant way in order to avoid masking within the mix. Similarly to Paul Simon's use of guitar effects in Graceland, I altered the frequency response, guitar pickup, and effects to provide clarity. One of the last steps was to record the lead and background vocals. The intensity and emotive qualities of the performances were crucial. I took multiple takes, listening to each one before recording the next. Sometimes I would push too hard, and other times I would need more energy and stronger deliveries. Similarly, I would change the lyrics if they were not working. Some of Orangey's most important lines were altered after being unsatisfied with their placement within the song. Finally, I tracked all of the subsidiary instruments. This included trombone, saxophone, acoustic, and 12-string guitar, piano, and auxiliary percussion. The intention shifted while recording this part of the arrangement. They had to support the main instruments and not get in the way or obscure the picture. In Stares Back at Us, the 12-string acts as a textural element until it becomes a melodic unifier in the final verse. Radical has short acoustic guitar runs that act as filler, intended to capture the ear in small doses. Orangey has an alto and tenor saxophone part that develops the tonality of the piece. Although these additions are subtle, they enhance the song in meaningful ways. Part 4. Conclusive Remarks. The connection between musical semiology and composition is useful in maintaining a focus. It is also useful in altering my perceptions of my own music. Since semiology is a never-ending process, I may never truly understand a piece of music. Therefore, I should never take it at face value. Similarly, a song like Graceland will always evolve in my mind because the ear and personal taste develops with time. In 5 years, I may have a completely new understanding of its neutral and aesthetic. In terms of my own writing, I will always strive to evolve my understandings of it. It is a symbiotic process, understanding current limitations and the possibility for advancement. There are also the limitations of semiological analysis in songwriting. The aesthetic of my personal works can never be fully realized by myself, and can only be informed from the feedbacks of others. Dr. Hutchinson graciously listened to my tracks and gave informative ideas and suggestions. A keynote involved the dynamic contrast throughout my pieces. The song should carry the listener from beginning to end, and at times the tracks would lose focus. I kept this in my mind as I rewrote and re-recorded, which allowed me to consider the overall intention of the music. Furthermore, constructive criticism can derive from both the aesthetic and the neutral qualities. It depends on the listener, for they may find one more important than the other. I must then take this new information and compare it to my own understandings. My personal biases will tend to process any feedback as aesthetic, which makes me susceptible to a negative reaction. However, I am learning to accept criticism in a positive way as more is given to me. The resultant analysis will then transfer to the poetic realm where changes can be performed. Moving forwards, the semiological tripartition will continue to be a useful technique when analyzing and writing music. The very nature of it ensures for open-mindedness and appreciation of all musics. Additionally, it aids in diminishing the harshness of the self-critique. Since the tripartition is all-encompassing, it positions my personal works with the works of history. It does not seek to qualify or quantify, it simply is. For future works, I plan on collaborating more in the songwriting process. Similarly, I will ask for more feedback, both in terms of the neutral and aesthetic. I will also focus more on my aesthetic understandings during the poietic process. This may result in more experimentation, seeing as I will have to adjust my work in order to generate new possibilities for emotive interpretation. Finally, and most importantly, I will continue to write in order to improve the craft.